From now on, you'll transfer your entire salary to Mom's account. You don't get to keep a single penny. And if you ever want money for food, you'll have to kneel and beg us." My brother shouted this across the living room while Mom smirked proudly behind him, arms folded like a queen watching her servant obey. "Hi, everyone, my name is Ava Rowan, I'm 31. And if you think I was about to bow to the same family that once borrowed my savings for emergencies and never paid it back, you're wrong. How far can family go before they become strangers in your own house?" The day started with coffee and ended with a financial ambush. They'd shown up unannounced, waving printed spreadsheets I'd never seen before. Family contribution plan, they called it. "You earn more than us, Ava," Mom said sweetly. "It's only fair we manage your finances. You're terrible with responsibility." I almost laughed. I'd paid off their credit card debt, kept their electricity on, and covered my brother's rent when he lost his job again. Now they wanted my entire paycheck. "Give me your banking app," my brother ordered, holding out his hand. "Right now." I met his stare. "No." The room went still. Even the ceiling fans seemed to stop. Mom's smile dropped. "Don't test us. You know we raised you. We deserve some return." I stood, slow and steady. "You're right," I said softly. "People should get what they deserve." They exchanged a look, victory flashing in their eyes. If only they knew what I meant. Because while they were busy scheming, I'd already set up something that would make them kneel. And when the first alert hit their phones later that night, the smirk on Mom's face would finally disappear. That evening, I sat at my desk scrolling through the last few months of transactions, every transfer, every bill, every small loan labeled as temporary help. Over $47,000 had quietly vanished into their accounts in 2 years. My phone buzzed with another message from Mom. "You'll thank us later, sweetheart. We're teaching you discipline." Discipline. That word made my stomach twist. I opened my work laptop and logged into the financial portal I designed for my company's digital security division. They didn't know my role wasn't just assistant. I was the lead systems analyst, the person who could trace, encrypt, and lock down anything connected to an account, even theirs. By midnight, I'd rerouted my salary into a new trust account under my foundation's name. Only I had access. Then, I froze all secondary authorizations linked to their devices, the same ones I'd set up years ago out of trust. Next came the surprise. I drafted an automatic alert through the bank's fraud department. Any attempt to withdraw funds from my old joint account would trigger an investigation. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. At 6:32 a.m., my phone buzzed with chaos. First, Mom's text. "Ava, something's wrong with the bank. None of the cards work." Then my brother. "Did you mess with the accounts? Fix it now." I poured myself coffee, humming softly. By the time they showed up banging on my door, I was already dressed for work, calm, collected, untouchable. When I opened the door, Mom's voice cracked with fury. "What did you do?" I smiled. "You told me to give everything to the family." I did. I just made sure the definition of family was updated. They pushed past me into the living room like they still owned the place. My brother threw his phone on the couch, the banking app opened to a bright red warning banner. "Account under fraud review." "What the hell did you do, Ava?" he barked. I sipped my coffee. Protected myself. Mom's eyes were wide with disbelief. "You froze our accounts? How dare you?" "That money kept this family afloat." I tilted my head. "You mean my money?" She flinched but didn't back down. "We're your parents. You owe us." That word, "oh," finally broke something inside me. Years of quiet obedience, endless sacrifice, invisible gratitude, all of it condensed into one sharp breath. "You owe me," I said quietly. "For every loan I never called back. For every night I paid bills you pretended didn't exist. For pretending love was a transaction." My brother laughed coldly. "You think this makes you powerful? You've just started a war you can't win." "Maybe," I said, reaching for my phone. "But I've already won the part that matters." On cue, a chime echoed from his phone. His face blanched as he read the message. "Fraudulent activity confirmed. Federal hold initiated. Please contact your branch immediately." I'd filed the report using my own credentials as a verified systems analyst. The hold was airtight. You can't do this. Mom shouted, voice trembling now. I already did, I replied, calm as glass. They stormed out moments later, slamming the door so hard the picture frame rattled on the wall. I didn't chase them. I just looked at the empty space they left behind and whispered, boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. And this time I was done being their safety net. For 2 days, silence. Then, like clockwork, the guilt campaign began. First came Mom's text. We didn't mean to upset you, Ava. Family just needs to share. You're being dramatic. Then my brother called, voice dripping with false calm. I can fix this if you just send me your login again. You've made things worse for everyone. I muted both of them. By Friday, my aunt messaged me, clearly recruited for damage control. Sweetheart, your mom's worried sick. She says you're overreacting. Overreacting. The word they'd used all my life when I refused to be manipulated. That evening, I stopped by my office. The security cameras caught my reflection in the glass doors, sharp, steady, no longer scared. My coworker Janelle peeked out from her cubicle. Hey, you look like someone who just got promoted. I smiled faintly. Maybe I promoted myself. In truth, my department head had just approved my proposal to lead a new project, financial fraud protection for women affected by family exploitation. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 9 p.m., my phone buzzed again, Mom. This time voice message. You've ruined everything. The mortgage, the bills, your brother's tuition, all frozen because of you. Do you feel powerful now? I played it twice, not out of guilt, but clarity. They had built their comfort on my silence. I wasn't silent anymore. I opened my laptop, logged into my foundation account, and transferred the first donation, $10,000, to a support fund for women escaping financial abuse. When the confirmation email arrived, I leaned back in my chair, a calm smile spreading across my face. They wanted control. I built legacy. They wanted my obedience. I gave them consequences. And this was just the beginning. By the next week, my story had spread through our extended family like wildfire, except this time, I controlled the narrative. My aunt called again, her voice suddenly softer. Ava, sweetheart, your mother's just under stress. You know how families are. Do you mean families that drain their kids dry, or the ones that call it love? I asked calmly. She didn't have an answer. At work, my project hit the front page of our company newsletter. Employee initiative helps dozens reclaim financial freedom. The same system that caught my family's tricks was now helping hundreds of women. My boss stopped by my desk, smiling. You've turned personal pain into public progress, Ava. That's leadership. I thanked him, but my mind was elsewhere. I'd received a court notice earlier that morning. Mom had filed a complaint claiming elder neglect. My jaw clenched until I read the judge's signature. Dismissed within 24 hours. The reason? Every financial record showed I'd supported them for years, down to the last electric bill. By that evening, my brother sent one last text. We lost everything because of you. I stared at the screen, then typed back. No. You lost access, not everything. There's a difference. I turned off my phone and stepped out onto my apartment balcony. Below, the city glowed. Alive, unbothered, mine. That night, I wrote a note to myself. Stop trying to save people who enjoy drowning. I folded it neatly and taped it inside my closet door, a quiet reminder that peace often costs less than forgiveness. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for choosing myself. The silence that followed was the best sound I'd ever heard. Weeks went by without a single message, no guilt trips, no fake apologies, just quiet. It gave me space to breathe and build. The nonprofit division of my project launched officially that month. We named it Balance Forward, dedicated to helping women protect their income from family exploitation. My inbox filled with stories like mine, teachers, nurses, designers, all drained by relatives who called control love. At the launch event, a reporter asked, "What made you start this, Ava?" I smiled. Someone once told me I wasn't responsible enough to handle my own money. I decided to prove them right by handling everyone else's better. The audience laughed softly, but behind that laughter was solidarity. That night, when I came home, An envelope was waiting under my door. No return address. Inside was a single folded paper, a faded family photo of me, Mom, and my brother at a picnic from years ago. On the back, in Mom's handwriting, "We just wanted to feel secure. Maybe we went too far." For a moment, the air felt heavy, like grief, not anger. I sat quietly, then tore the photo in half, not out of rage, but release. Some relationships don't need closure. They just need to stop taking space in your life. I burned the paper in a small dish on my balcony, watching the ashes swirl into the night sky. When the last ember faded, I whispered, "Goodbye, for real this time." The next morning, I transferred another donation from my foundation, this time in Mom's name. It wasn't forgiveness. It was peace on my terms. Months later, I was invited to speak at a financial empowerment conference in San Francisco. The theme was reclaiming control. The irony wasn't lost on me. Standing backstage, I took a deep breath, adjusting the mic clip to my blazer. I could almost hear my mother's voice echoing from years ago. "Ava, you're too emotional to handle business." I smiled at the memory. She had no idea she was training me for this. When I stepped on stage, the applause hit me like sunlight. I told them my story, not as a victim, but as proof that you can rebuild even after your own family burns the bridge. The room was silent when I said, "Control disguised as love is still control." Afterward, a young woman approached me, tears in her eyes. "I thought I was the only one." "You're not," I told her. "And you never were." Her name was Jasmine, a single mother whose parents had stolen her savings under the promise of helping her budget. I helped her file the paperwork to secure her assets that same week. It hit me then, my pain had turned into purpose. That evening, I sat in my hotel room, looking out over the glowing skyline. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "We saw you on the news. We're proud of you." No name, but I didn't need one. I knew it was Mom. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just understanding. Sometimes people change too late. Sometimes they just change enough to let you move on. Either way, I finally had peace. A year later, I stood inside the New Balance Forward headquarters, a glass front office filled with light, laughter, and second chances. The walls were covered with framed letters from women who'd rebuilt their lives, each one a quiet testament to what happens when control ends and freedom begins. Jasmine now worked beside me as program coordinator. "We just got approved for expansion," she said, her grin wide. "Seattle, Chicago, maybe even DC." I smiled, flipping through the proposal. "We'll reach more people than we ever thought possible." "Your story started it all," she said softly. I looked up at her. "No, our stories did." That night, after the team left, I lingered alone in the office. The city lights shimmered through the glass, and my reflection stared back. Not the frightened woman from a year ago, but someone grounded, steady, whole. My phone buzzed. A bank alert. Automatic transfer successful. $15,000 donation sent to Women's Education Fund. I'd made it a habit now. Each time I remembered pain, I turned it into purpose. I poured a cup of tea, stepped out onto the balcony, and let the cool night air brush against my face. In the distance, a familiar figure crossed the street. My mother. She glanced up, saw me, hesitated. Then she smiled, small, uncertain, but real, before walking on. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. Some goodbyes are better left silent. I turned back toward the glowing sign on the wall. Balance forward, protect, heal, rebuild. For the first time in my life, I understood the word family. It wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about who stood beside you when you stopped begging to be seen. And finally, I had found mine.
I shouldn't have been invited. That was my first thought when I pulled into the circular driveway of the Halloway estate. Same slate stones, same wrought iron gate, same creeping ivy, curling up the columns like it owned the place. It didn't not anymore. Tessa's voice greeted me before I stepped fully inside. "Mara, you made it. God, you look so Portland." She kissed the air beside my cheek and reached for my coat, pausing just long enough to scan the lapels. My jacket was clean-tailored but thrifted. She knew it. I knew she knew. The dining room hadn't changed since the year my father died. Same crystal chandeliers, same oversized silver cutlery that only gets pulled out when there's a press photographer around. None tonight, but old habits. Cousin Brad poured Pinot like he was hosting a tech summit. We just closed a Series B equity valuation in the mid-nine figures, he announced mostly to the ceiling. Tessa nodded along, lifting her glass. That vineyard in Tuscany I told you about. We're doing private dining now by appointment only. Clients are flown in. Across the room, my mother smoothed her skirt and pretended not to look at me. I sat near the end of the table. My glass was filled with iced tea. Not because I don't drink, because I don't play. Brad leaned back, mock serious. So, Mara, tell us about your little apartment on Alder Street. Still renting? I smiled. I like the space. Tessa tilted her head. Didn't know people our age still rented, but I guess it works for some people. There was laughter. Dry, polite, well-rehearsed. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, because none of them would have landed in that room. What they didn't know, what none of them had ever thought to wonder, was that the Alder Street complex, that was my first acquisition, and this estate, the one they held these legacy dinners in like it was still theirs. I signed the lease renewal 6 weeks ago. The thing is, I wasn't always invisible here. There's a photo buried somewhere in the attic if they haven't thrown it out yet. I'm 9 years old, kneeling in the dirt with my father planting the rose bushes under the south window. We'd gotten matching work gloves at the hardware store. His were too tight. Mine kept slipping. We called that corner the quiet garden. He said it needed something gentle because the house had grown too proud. My father, James Halloway, believed in preservation, not performance. He taught me how to sand wood floors, how to read a mortgage, and how to listen without interrupting. He ran the Halloway estate the way someone might run a summer camp or a public library, orderly but kind. He died in May. Sudden cardiac arrest. I was 22, home from grad school for the weekend. By Christmas, the tone had shifted. My mother remarried a man named Conrad Langley, a banking executive with wine-colored socks and a daughter at Wharton. Conrad moved into the house, and slowly. So did the silence. We stopped having board meetings at the breakfast table. My room was turned into a Pilates studio. The rose bushes were torn out to make space for an herb wall. I remember sitting in the parlor with a folder in my lap, my thesis project, a modular housing initiative designed to protect long-term renters from predatory buyouts. I was proud of it. Still, I pitched it to the family foundation? Tessa laughed before I even finished the first sentence. That's cute, Mara, but scalable how? Brad muttered something about social equity being great for brochures. Mom didn't say anything. She just sipped her tea like she didn't hear me. That night, I folded the folder back into my bag and booked a one-way train to Portland. I didn't leave with bitterness. I left with blueprints. Stone Pine Holdings started with a duplex I bought under a friend's name, then a triplex, then a 12-unit on Alder Street with wood beams and 1940s plumbing. I learned to seal leaks, handle evictions, negotiate tax liens. I built slow, quiet. And I never used the name Halloway, not once, because legacy isn't what you're born into. It's what you build without applause. My first property was a 3-unit brick walk-up on Alder Street, tucked between a shuttered corner store and a Pentecostal church with hand-painted signs. The seller was desperate I was green, but I'd brought a pre-approved loan, a market analysis. I'd written myself and a blank check of nerves. I signed the deed under the name of Cascade Arc, LLC. I'd formed it the week prior, using a registered agent in Salem and a rented P.O. box. No one could trace it back to me. That was the point I moved into. Unit 2A. Refinished the cabinets with my own hands, learned to snake a drain pipe. Ate beans for weeks while I covered the roof repair out of pocket. But every month, the rent checks came in on time. Modest, consistent. I'd check the mail, tuck away the envelopes, and whisper, "Thank you." I didn't tell anyone. Not even Isla. Not yet. The next building came 2 years later, a 16-unit complex with vintage ironwork and asbestos problems. I had it cleared under Section 8 preservation zoning, got the tenants rehoused during the process, and brought them back when it was safe. Word spread slowly. Landlords who didn't raise rents, a firm that fixed instead of flipping. Tenants started sending friends my way. Single mothers, veterans, pensioners clinging to rent-controlled leases. I met Isla at a city council meeting about transit rezoning. She was taking notes for a local tenant group, her blouse stained with ink and stress. She didn't recognize me when she later applied to be my assistant. That was just as well. I hired her, gave her health insurance, and never once mentioned who I used to be. My portfolio grew. Cascade Arc branched into mixed-use buildings, storefront preservation energy retrofits. By 33, I was managing over 110,000 square feet across 5 cities. And all of it, every contract, every LLC, every holding company was carefully layered. I didn't want the Halloway name contaminating any of it. But I still kept a single item from the old estate, a yellowed landscape map hand-sketched by my father. It had been folded into the back of an old ledger I took with me the night I left. At the bottom in his blocky handwriting, "Let the house breathe, or it will forget how to shelter." That map sat on my wall above the desk where I drafted every acquisition proposal. By the time I made an offer on Halloway Plaza, the family estate, now technically under Lien from mismanaged taxes, I already owned 70% of the block surrounding it. They didn't see it coming because people like them never look behind. The next family dinner felt colder even in June. Tessa had on a new pair of Louboutin heels and walked like the floor should thank her. Brad arrived late claiming a client call, but he reeked of vodka and sunscreen. I wore gray slacks and a blouse with no label. Isla had texted me that morning. "Contracts are signed. Holdings at 92% ownership. We're locked in." The estate wasn't just emotionally mine anymore. It was legally mine, and yet I still knocked before entering. Dinner was over. Salted lamb and undercooked risotto. Evelyn. My mother passed out place cards like we were at a benefit gala. She didn't say anything to me. She hadn't since 2015. Halfway through the meal, my Uncle Malcolm cleared his throat. He was head of the estate board now, a title with just enough power to be dangerous. "We've had some correspondence," he began, not looking at anyone in particular. "Stone Pine. Holdings has raised several questions about accounting inconsistencies. There's going to be a financial review. Forks froze mid-air. Stone Pine." Tessa blinked. "Who are they again?" "A private investment firm," Malcolm said tightly. "They've been purchasing legacy properties across the Northwest. We sold them a partial stake a few quarters ago. They've since increased their position," Brad scoffed. "Vultures. They're probably foreign. Want to turn the place into a museum or a condo farm." I sipped my iced tea. Malcolm continued. "They're requesting itemized records for the past 5 years. Renovation invoices, contract bids, foundation expenses." Tessa went pale beneath her spray tan. "That's absurd," she said. "The foundation's private. They bought the plaza." "Tessa?" His voice was harder now. "They own majority rights, including the right to audit." Brad slammed his napkin down. "We're not handing over our financials to some faceless." "They're not asking," Malcolm interrupted. "They're requiring." A silence settled over the table. Thick, pregnant. Across from me, Evelyn cut her lamb in perfect silence, her diamond bracelet tapping the plate. She still hadn't looked at me. "I told you to keep that roofing budget clean," Tessa hissed toward Brad. I said, "No bundling." "And I told you not to run the plumbing through your husband's shell company," Brad shot back. "So it's my fault you billed us double for landscaping because I had to clean up your—" "Enough," Malcolm snapped. "This isn't about finger-pointing. This is about Stone Pine, seeing things we didn't disclose." My fork hovered over the plate. I watched them all. Not out of amusement, though. There was some. Not out of vengeance, out of confirmation. This was rot. Quiet. Rot. Moral laziness that wore pearls and carried legacy invitations. They'd made a kingdom out of inherited capital and thought silence meant safety. But silence in my world was where I planted seeds. The audit documents were already compiled. The legal notices were already filed tomorrow morning. They'd get an invitation one they couldn't ignore to a compliance review session with Stone Pine Holdings. They'd come thinking they could charm a faceless executive, and I would be sitting at the head of the table. The room was quiet when I walked in. They had already gathered Brad, Tessa, Evelyn, Malcolm, 2 estate attorneys, and a Stone Pine Holdings liaison they didn't know was mine. They were seated at the long mahogany table in the estate's old library. My father's library. The chandelier above them had been recently restored. Brass crystal imported wiring. I paid for it, quietly. 3 years ago, no one had asked where the funds came from. No one ever asked. I stepped through the doorway. The click of my heels against the hardwood made Brad look up, then Tessa, then Evelyn. No one said a word. "Sorry I'm late," I said evenly. Traffic on Alder was a nightmare. I set my briefcase down at the head of the table where my father used to sit, where Malcolm had assumed I wouldn't. Brad narrowed his eyes. "What are you doing here? I'm chairing this review," I said, unclipping the latches. Tessa laughed. "Excuse me." I opened the case and began laying out packets of documentation, sliding one in front of each person, like playing cards. "I'm Mara Halloway," I said calmly, "managing partner and sole owner of Stonepine Holdings. As of this quarter, I control 92% of this estate's equity and 100% of its redevelopment rights." Brad's jaw dropped. "That's not possible. I filed the acquisition through Cascade Arc Holdings. You remember Alder Street, don't you? You joked about me renting it. That was the first building I bought." "You lied." Evelyn finally spoke, her voice razor thin. "No," I said. "You just never asked." Malcolm lifted his packet, flipping pages, his face drained of color. "This can't be real." I turned to Tessa Page, 6. "The invoice your husband submitted for the East Wing plumbing retrofit, $282,000. Average market bid for that scope, $91,000. I've included comparable estimates." She paled. "You went through our contracts. I had a fiduciary duty." "Unlike you." Brad shoved his packet back toward me. This is a stunt." I didn't flinch. Page 9. Covers, the roofing repairs that allegedly required $2,003 million. According to the signed scope, they included materials not even used on this property. Evelyn stood. "You don't get to come back here and humiliate us." I looked at her for the first time. Directly. "You humiliated yourselves." She faltered. I continued, voice still calm. "You told everyone I was poor, that I rented, that I was irrelevant, but I've been the one underwriting your overdrafts for years, quietly without recognition, because I believed stupidly that protecting this estate meant something." Malcolm swallowed. "Why didn't you just tell us? Because telling you would have made it about ego." I said I wanted the work to speak. Tessa's voice cracked. "You want revenge? That's what this is." "No," I said. "If I wanted revenge, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be calling the IRS." The room went still. I reached into my folder and pulled out one final sheet, a ledger. "This is a list of every anonymous transfer I've made to the Estate Foundation since 2014. Every invoice I've personally covered. Every debt I absorbed to keep this place solvent." Evelyn's hands trembled as she read. I looked at her. "You thought I left, but I was still here. Just not where you could see me." Malcolm cleared his throat, quiet. "What do you want?" "Mara," I considered, then answered, "accountability, structural reform. No more shell contracts, no more nepotism, no more passing legacy off as immunity. This place will be rebuilt from inside out with ethics, transparency, and decency." "And if we say no?" Brad asked. I looked at him, then I released the audit. Silence. Tessa lowered her eyes. Malcolm exhaled. Evelyn sat down slowly. No one objected. I gathered the extra packets and placed them back in my briefcase. As I did, I looked up at the chandelier. "You once called me poor," I said softly. No one moved. I turned to the door. "I paid for that light above your head, and then I left the room." The official board statement was released the next morning. Stonepine Holdings would assume stewardship of the Halloway estate under a new operating charter, independent audits, ethical contracting, and public reporting of all foundation activities. The existing board would be dissolved. No one contested it. The press picked it up by noon. Former Black Sheep restructures iconic Sonoma legacy. I didn't read the comments. Brad sent a terse email 2 days later. "I withdraw from any future dealings. I expect my privacy to be respected." I didn't respond. Tessa resigned from her public nonprofit roles and pulled her husband's firm from several active projects. A week later, I heard they'd relocated to Austin. Evelyn didn't call. But 3 days after the release, I received a hand-delivered envelope with her handwriting, no note, just a check. The exact amount I had used to save the estate from foreclosure in 2018, I didn't cash it. Instead, I filed it in the foundation archives under a tab labeled Symbolic Gestures Unclaimed. Malcolm called. He wanted to meet. I agreed. We sat on the same back patio my father used to read on now, repaired, repainted, and shaded with the same lemon tree I planted with him in 1997. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "You're more your father than I ever gave you credit for." I didn't respond right away. "Then that's the nicest insult I've heard all week." He smiled reluctantly. "You know, we thought you left because you were soft." Sensitive. "I am," I said. "I just stopped apologizing for it." He nodded. "You built something real without asking anyone for permission." I looked out at the estate's west wing. Quiet, dignified, no longer cloaked in illusion. He built something real, too. I'm just trying to keep it from collapsing. We sat in silence for a few moments, the kind that doesn't need filling. Before he left, he said, "You didn't have to come back." I nodded, but I did, because someone had to stay. That evening, I returned to my apartment on Alder Street, the one they all laughed at, the one I still lived in, not because I had to, but because I chose to. Outside my window, an older tenant was sweeping her steps, humming to herself. A teenager in a hoodie waved at me on his bike. The buildings here weren't grand, but they were clean, safe, steady like legacy should be. I changed into a t-shirt-made tee and opened my father's old ledger. Inside the back cover, I wrote a single line. Restoration begins in silence. A week later, I hosted a small gathering in the courtyard of Alder Street. Not a press event. No string quartet, just tenants, neighbors, kids with juice boxes, and one table of cookies. Isla baked herself. The light was soft golden. The kind of California evening that smells faintly of jasmine and pavement still warm from the day I stood near the garden bench, the one I'd restored last spring, using reclaimed cedar and an old sketch my father had drawn. His handwriting was still faintly penciled in under the seat. I hadn't sanded it off. Mrs. Alvarez, who'd lived in Unit 1B for 38 years, settled beside me. She wore a navy cardigan and carried her folding cane like a scepter. "Your little party's better than all those foundation galas," she said, smiling. "At least the cookies don't come with lectures," I laughed. "That's Isla's specialty. Cookies without speeches." She glanced around. "It's a good building, you know. Not just the bones, the way it feels, like it's meant for people, not just price tags." I nodded. That was the idea. Down the path, I saw Tessa's daughter 12 now icing a sugar cookie with a plastic knife sitting next to the boy from Unit 3C. I wondered if she knew who I was, if anyone had told her. Maybe not yet. Maybe never. That was fine. Malcolm arrived late. He didn't speak much, but he brought a lemon pie. Said it was a tradition. As the sun dipped lower, I stayed where I was standing in the middle of the space they once said was beneath me. The building was lit from within, not just bulbs and sconces, but warmth, noise, language, community. My phone buzzed. A new message from Isla Tenant. Renewal rates hit 94%. Local business leases extended. Press wants a follow-up. "Ignore," I typed back. For now, then, I turned off my phone. This wasn't a story that needed broadcasting. It was enough that it happened, that it held, that it lasted. When I was 16, my parents gave my room to my pregnant twin sister. They said it was time I learned to grow up, so I slept in a tent, outside, behind the kitchen window, where they served cake and giggled over crib colors. That winter was long, but it started much earlier than December. My parents always told the story of how they prayed for a child. One child, a girl, if the Lord allowed it. Brianna arrived first, pink-faced, perfect lungs, strong enough to make the nurse laugh. I came 4 minutes later, quieter, smaller, unplanned. They didn't tell that part. They just called me the bonus, the unexpected, the extra. When people saw us together, they'd say things like, "Twins. Oh, but they're so different." And my mother would smile and reply, "Yes, Brianna takes after me." That was her way of saying, "This one belongs. That one, not so much." It wasn't just the words. It was in the way they dressed her in new clothes from the department store while I wore hand-me-downs from church rummage sales, in the way her name was always embroidered on things, pillowcases, backpacks, even Christmas stockings, and mine was Sharpied on the tag. Brianna had tea parties and dance recitals. I had chores. They said I was more practical, like that was praise. But when you're 7, no one wants to be practical. You just want to be seen. I remember one Thanksgiving, she got a seat at the big table with the adults I was told to help Aunt Marla in the kitchen. That was the year I burned the sweet potatoes and got scolded. while Brianna was complimented on how nicely she folded her napkin. My father once said to me while fixing the gutter, "You're the kind of girl who'll get by just fine. You don't need all that praise stuff," but the way he said it made it sound like a consolation prize. The only person who ever spoke to me like I mattered was Grandpa James. He taught me how to bait a hook, how to change a tire, how to hold still when the world gets too loud. He'd say, "You've got more spine than the whole family combined, Claire. But you keep it quiet. That's power." I didn't always believe him, but I clung to his words like rope. He died when I was 14. After that, nobody called me Steel Girl anymore, not even in jest. A year later, they sent out a holiday card. Brianna stood between our parents holding a sonogram. Matching sweaters, matching smiles. I wasn't in the photo. But if you looked closely, bottom right behind the porch column, you'd see it, a blur of denim and a bent elbow. Just enough to say, "We didn't forget you, we just framed you out." I was 16 when they told me, "Mom, Linda." Though I stopped calling her that out loud sometime around 12, stood in the hallway with a mug of decaf and that pinched smile she wore when she was about to say something she already knew you wouldn't like. She'd started using it on me more in those years, like she'd grown allergic to my presence, but didn't want to be impolite about it. "Claire," she said, "we've got news." Behind her, my father, Tom, leaned against the stair banister, arms folded like he was waiting for a sermon to end. He didn't speak, not yet. That was Linda's job. He just hovered the punctuation mark at the end of her sentences. "Brianna's expecting." I already knew the test in the bathroom trash, the secretive whispers on the landline, the way she touched her belly after dinner like she was waiting for music to start. It had all been there, I just hadn't said it aloud. Unlike them, I still believed some things deserved silence. "That's a lot," I said carefully. Linda waved the air like she was dismissing a mosquito. "It's a blessing, Claire." "She's 17, sure, but she's ready. They're getting married. Tom's calling the pastor this week." Tom nodded once as if to confirm that yes, the church basement was already booked, and no, my opinion wasn't required. Then came the part that mattered. "With the baby coming, we'll need space. Your room is the only one close to the bathroom." "It makes sense." I stared at her. "What do you mean? You'll need to pack up," she said. "We'll move your things into the garage for now." "The garage," I said, like I hadn't heard her. "There's no insulation. It smells like fertilizer." She tilted her head like I was being unreasonable. "You're old enough to manage. We've let you stay longer than most parents would. You know, let me stay," as if my existence was a favor they'd extended past its due date. Brianna walked past at that moment, glowing like a lighthouse in one of Dad's old flannel shirts. She paused in the hallway, eyes wide and performative. "You're not mad, are you? I mean, the baby's going to need a lot." She looked at me like I was supposed to say, "Of course not," and maybe cry or smile or hug her. Instead, I turned, walked up the stairs, and started packing. That night, I moved into the backyard. Not the garage, they'd filled it with boxes for the baby shower, so I found the old tent from summer camp patched to tear with duct tape and set it up under the elm tree. The nights in Georgia are quiet in winter, but not silent. The wind has opinions. The house still laughed. Through the frost-bitten flap of nylon, I could see their kitchen lights. They passed casseroles back and forth like love letters, set up balloons, hung baby socks from string. No one looked outside. They gave me a tent so she could have a crib. What were they planning to give me if I stayed? The tent lasted 19 nights. By the end of week 3, my fingers cracked even when wrapped in gloves, and my homework pages curled from condensation. I still went to school, still brushed my teeth at the gym locker room, still told anyone who asked that I was just camping out for a bit until our cousins left town. No one asked twice. During the day, I walked. I couldn't stay in the yard, not with Linda constantly peeking out to make sure I didn't track mud near the patio. So I wandered the sidewalks, circling the square, stopping at the library when it opened. That's how I passed the bakery. It wasn't fancy. The window paint was chipped and the neon, open, flickered like it had a stutter, but the smell, warm sugar-burnt cinnamon rising dough, hit me in the chest like a memory from a better life. I stood outside longer than I meant to, watching the man behind the counter mop the floor with slow, even strokes. He noticed, opened the door with one hand still gripping the mop. "You just window shopping?" he asked. "Or you lost?" I hesitated, then said, "Neither. I was just walking." He looked me over, Not in a cruel way, just observant. I must have looked terrible. Oversized, hoodie split lip, the kind of face that flinches before anyone raises their voice. "You hungry?" I nodded. He motioned me in, wiped his hands on his apron. "Frank Delaney, owner, janitor, baker, hostage negotiator. You can sweep." I nodded again, then grabbed that broom. There was no speech about helping the less fortunate. No questions about why I looked like I hadn't slept in a bed in weeks. Just a broom, a cloth, and a simple instruction mop, front to back, never side to side. I worked every afternoon that week. Quietly, Frank didn't talk much, but when he did, it was plain useful. How to check yeast by smell. How to watch a customer's face to see if they liked what they were chewing. By Friday, he handed me a key. I got a cot upstairs. It's next to the sugar sacks and the window doesn't open. But it's warm and the roof doesn't leak. If you want it, I took it. The bed frame creaked. The mattress was thin, but it was the first night I didn't hear Brianna laughing through the kitchen wall. The first night I wasn't cold. And the first night in a long time I didn't feel like I was trespassing inside my own life. I stayed above the bakery for nearly 4 years. At first, it was just a cot and a shelf where I kept my books and my backpack. But Frank never asked me to leave, and I never gave him a reason to. I worked every morning before school and every evening after I learned how to braid dough, when to pull a pie before the crust lied to you, how to stretch your hands without breaking the gluten. Frank never wasted words, but when I messed up, he'd grunt and show me again. That was his way of saying, "You're not hopeless." I finished high school early, not because anyone pushed me, but because I wanted out of everything that came before. No prom, no senior trip, no pictures in the yearbook. Just a signature from the principal and a bus ride back to the bakery where Frank handed me a warm roll and said, "You're gonna need a suit for job interviews." He didn't offer to buy it. He just said it like fact, like weather. I enrolled in night classes at the community college. Accounting first, then small business law, then supply chain. I worked mornings at the bakery, evenings at a diner, and weekends doing books for a friend of Frank's who owned a hardware store. I didn't have time for anything else. I didn't want anything else. By the time I turned 25, I had 3 certificates, 1 business license, and no debt. Frank offered to retire and sign over the bakery, but I said no. He earned that place. Instead, I saved every dollar. No vacations, no takeout, no nonsense. I lived like I was still in that tent behind the house because part of me believed if I stopped, they'd find me again, that someone would tap me on the shoulder and say, "This isn't yours, you're just borrowing it." But I kept saving. At 29, I bought the house. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, nothing fancy. The porch leaned left, the floor creaked, the kitchen hadn't seen a working stove since the Bush administration, but it had walls and a deed and my name on it. Not Frank's, not Tom's, not Linda's, mine. I moved in alone with a mattress on the floor and 2 folding chairs from the bakery's back room. I ate dinner off a cardboard box and hung one thing on the wall, a photo of me and Grandpa James taken the summer before he died. He was squinting at the sun. I was holding a fishing rod too big for my hands, he'd told me once. "One day you'll build something nobody can take from you." So I did, and I didn't tell anyone. It came on a Tuesday. I was sanding the windowsill in the front room when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Frank never dropped by unannounced, and the mailman left things in the box. Most people texted first or didn't come at all. The doorbell rang again, longer this time, impatient. I wiped my hands on my jeans, walked down the hall, and opened the door. There they were. Linda, Tom, Brianna, her husband, 3 kids, matching shirts. Linda was holding a Tupperware, the kind she used to deliver to church potlucks when I was 10. "Claire," she said brightly, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "We heard you bought a house. We're so proud of you." Tom gave a stiff nod, then looked past me into the hallway like he was checking the condition of a rental. Brianna smiled wide and stepped forward, her baby on one hip, the other 2 clinging to her skirt. "This place looks so good. You've really done well for yourself." I didn't move from the doorway. Linda lifted the Tupperware. "We brought banana pudding. Thought we could catch up." "Catch up," I repeated. She laughed like I'd made a joke. "It's been too long, sweetheart. We've all missed you." I said nothing. The hallway behind me was still half painted. I could hear the fan running upstairs. A grocery bag sat on the counter with eggs and milk I hadn't yet put away. Tom cleared his throat. "Brianna's family's getting bigger. They're a bit tight on space right now. We were thinking." We thought, Linda interrupted, smoothing her blouse, that maybe it's time to let the past go, start fresh. You've got all this room now, and well, family should be together, Brianna chimed in. I mean, we could all help each other. Wouldn't that be nice? I looked at their faces, smiling, expectant, and then I looked at the shoes on their feet. New clean, the shoes of people who hadn't walked through snow to get to school, who hadn't mopped bakery floors before sunrise or slept on sugar sacks while pretending it was a mattress. I lived in a tent, I said quietly, in your backyard. The smiles faltered just a little. You knew, I said to Tom. You saw me through the kitchen window. He didn't answer. And now you want to live here? Like none of it happened. Linda's voice sharpened. Claire, don't be dramatic. That was years ago. You're right, I said. It was. I stepped back and opened the door wider, not to let them in, to let them see. The bare walls, the scuffed floor, the quiet space I'd built without them. You should go, Claire, Linda began. We're trying to do what I said. Rewrite it. Brianna shifted the baby on her hip. You don't have to be bitter. I almost laughed, but instead, I shut the door, not slammed, not with anger, just closed, firm. A banana pudding sat on my porch for 3 days. I left it there. Let the sun have it. 2 weeks after they showed up at my door, a letter arrived from a local attorney's office. I stood on my porch in the morning light, coffee cooling in my hand, reading and rereading the first line. This letter serves as formal notice of a legal petition filed by the Matheson family requesting shared claim to the residential property located at 144 Oak Lane. I sat down on the steps. Let the paper curl in the breeze. The legal language was cold, efficient. They weren't asking to be part of my life. They were asking for a piece of what I'd built on paper. They were suing me for my house. The next morning, I called Adele Watkins. Frank had given me her name years ago, told me, if anything ever gets ugly, she's the one you want. She was older, sharp-eyed, and didn't waste time. I met her in a small office above a notary shop that smelled like lemon cleaner and paper dust. She read the letter once, then again, slower. They're claiming this was purchased with family money, she said. It wasn't. You sure? I nodded. I worked for every dollar. No gifts, no loans, nothing in writing or in spirit. Adele looked at me for a long moment. Then she opened a drawer, pulled out a legal pad, and started asking questions. Birth dates, prior addresses, any known inheritance or assets. When she asked about my grandfather, I told her everything I remembered. The fishing trips the old van he used to take us to the lake. The tin box he kept locked in his closet that I was never allowed to touch. Was there a will? I don't know, I said. He died when I was 14. They told me he left everything to my parents. Adele leaned back, fingers pressed together. Let me look into it. She called me 4 days later and told me to come in. When I arrived, she had a thin folder on the table and a look I'd seen before on Frank's face the night he found me sleeping behind the flour sacks. There was a will, she said. It had been filed quietly under an outdated name, James F. Matheson Sr., with a restricted access code that Adele had requested through probate court. It listed one beneficiary, Claire Elizabeth Matheson. The date was 9 months before his death. He left you everything she said. A modest trust, real estate stock, his war pension. I stared at the folder, but I never saw a dime. No, because your parents petitioned for temporary guardianship and assumed fiduciary control. You were a minor. They liquidated the assets and declared them absorbed into household debt. They spent it. She nodded. All of it. Most notably, 6 months after the liquidation, your sister's wedding was paid in full. Your parents purchased a new SUV and they refinanced their mortgage. I didn't say anything. Adele closed the folder. You have a case. Will it hold? With documentation? Yes, but it won't be pleasant. I don't need pleasant. She paused. You want to go after them? No, I said. I want what was mine. She nodded slowly, slid the folder toward me. They might not have thought you'd find out. I ran my hand across the cover. They thought I'd stay in the tent. The courtroom wasn't large, just a few pew-like benches, scuffed floors, and a judge who looked like she'd heard every kind of family lie already. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Adele beside me, calm as stone. Across from us were Linda and Tom, dressed like it was Sunday service, and Brianna, who looked everywhere but at me. Her husband sat behind them, chewing on his nails. The judge called the hearing to order. The petition for shared property rights was read aloud in monotone legal cadence, on the grounds that the defendant's current residence was acquired using liquidated family assets belonging to the estate of James F. Matheson Sr. That was the first time they said Grandpa's name out loud in that room. Tom flinched. Adele stood. Her voice was measured crisp. Your Honor, we submit into evidence the last will and testament of James F. Matheson, Sr., dated 9 months prior to his death, naming Claire Elizabeth Matheson as sole beneficiary of all liquid and assigned assets. She handed the folder to the bailiff. Further documentation will show the estate was appropriated by the petitioners during the defendant's minority, with funds traced to the purchase of a vehicle home, renovations and event expenses for Brianna Ann, Matheson's wedding. Linda leaned forward. That money was for the family. Claire was part of the household. We didn't steal it. Adele didn't blink. Claire was a minor, she was not consulted, and she never received notification of her legal inheritance. The judge flipped through the folder. Her brow furrowed once slightly. Tom spoke for the first time. We were told it was joint, that we were the executors. You filed as temporary guardians, Adele said, but you never disclosed the will's existence to the beneficiary. That's fraud. Brianna finally looked at me then. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I didn't speak. I had nothing left to say to people who once looked through me like frost on a window. The judge closed the folder and looked at Linda. Did you inform your daughter of her legal right to this trust when she turned 18? Linda didn't answer. The judge turned to me. Miss Matheson, do you wish to file a counterclaim? I nodded. Once I do. A pause. Then. This court finds in favor of the defendant. All property rights remain solely with Miss Matheson. Restitution proceedings will begin within 30 days. The gavel came down like a door closing. Not slammed, just final. As we stood, Linda reached for my arm. I stepped back. Claire, she whispered, we were just trying to do what's right for Brianna. I looked at her. You did. Then I walked out and didn't turn around. The house was quiet when I got back. I locked the door behind me and slipped off my shoes, like I always did, even though there was no one left to track in mud. The late afternoon light spilled across the floorboards, catching the edges of unfinished trim and the slight tilt in the hallway. Imperfections I'd memorized, chosen. I didn't feel victorious. I felt still. Like a storm had passed without knocking anything over, just shifting the air and making everything sharper. Restitution would take months. Adele would handle the filings. I'd get some of the money back, though, not all. But it wasn't about the money. It never had been. I opened the closet in the front hall and pulled out a small cardboard box labeled Grandpa. Keep inside was the only thing I'd saved from the old house. Besides my birth certificate, a photo of Grandpa James and me taken when I was 8. We were standing in front of his truck, both squinting into the sun. He had one hand on my shoulder and the other holding a tackle box. I took the photo and walked to the living room. Above the fireplace was a nail I'd never used. I hadn't wanted to hang anything until I knew the house was truly mine. Now I did. I placed the frame carefully, stepped back. Then I reached into the box again and pulled out something smaller. His old Navy dog tag, the one he used to wear like a keychain. I set it on the mantel beside the photo, then slid a small brass plate beneath it, something I'd had engraved weeks earlier before the hearing, before the paperwork. It read, "This house was built from silence, not from love, and that is enough." I didn't cry. There was nothing to mourn. They had taught me absence. They'd shown me how to vanish from photographs, how to go unnoticed at a table, how to live at the edges of a family without making a sound. And I had learned so well. I rebuilt a life from it. Later that night, I turned off my phone. I didn't need to read the messages. I knew what they'd say. Regret, guilt, twisted apologies wrapped in blame. I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the wind move through the trees in the front yard. I wasn't waiting. No one was coming, but for the first time in years, I could finally hear myself breathing. The email came on a Wednesday. The subject line was harmless enough. Quick update. Pre-Christmas dinner, but I knew before I opened it. It was from my sister-in-law, Jessa. 5 lines, no greeting, no warmth. Hey, Celeste, this year's Christmas dinner is going to be a little tight space-wise. Hope you understand. Let's find another time to catch up after the holidays. Wishing you a peaceful season. I read it twice, not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. There was no phone call, no explanation. Just another polite erasure wrapped in seasonal language and signed off with indifference. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it to anyone or mention it in our family group thread, though I noticed later that my name had quietly vanished from the "What's everyone bringing" list. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair. Outside my apartment window, the city moved as if nothing had happened. Cars hummed past below, and someone across the street had already put up blinking lights. The coffee on my desk had gone cold. On the shelf behind me sat a small red box, one I hadn't touched in years. I reached for it without thinking, lifted the lid. Inside was a folded card, Christmas 27, one of the only handwritten notes I'd ever received from my father. Keep your head down, Celeste. Quiet. Girls last longer. He meant it as encouragement, I think. I was 16 then, and they still talked to me. I still had a place at the table. That was before I learned that silence makes people forget you. They forgot who paid the deposit on Mason's first office. They forgot who picked up Grandma when no one else would drive. They forgot I existed unless they needed something easy and visible or quiet. But this time, this year, they made a mistake. Because while they were deciding who was important enough to invite, they didn't know I had just finalized the acquisition of the logistics company they'd been courting for the last 11 months. The one they were planning to pitch on December 21st, the one whose future depended on a single name. Mine, and I was done being quiet. I've always known how my family sees me, not with malice exactly. Just distance. Like I was a reliable background detail, someone you count on to refill the coffee or take the photo, someone you'd ever feature in the frame. My older brother Mason, on the other hand, was the centerpiece. He was always full of energy, the kind of person who took up space without asking for it. Loud, laugh, firm handshake, firm opinions. My parents used to call him a natural leader. I once heard my mother say he could sell rain to Seattle. They never said things like that about me. With me, it was always Celeste. Doesn't mind. Celeste will understand. She's always been more private. Learned young that being quiet made things easier for everyone. When Mason wanted to borrow my car, I handed over the keys. When my dad needed someone to organize the family's tax folders, I did it without being asked. I never made a fuss about it. That's how I got through dinners where no one asked about my job or holidays, where I arrived on time and left with the dishes. They didn't ignore me out of cruelty. They ignored me because I didn't ask them not to. At my niece's birthday last year, I gave her a telescope and a book about constellations. Mason gave her a glittery scooter. Everyone clapped for the scooter. The telescope stayed in its box. My mom thanked me, but she couldn't remember what I'd brought 10 minutes later. It's not that I wanted applause. I just wanted to be seen. When I got promoted 2 years ago, my name printed on a real office door, I told my family over dinner at my parents' place. Mason didn't even pause between bites. "That's great, Celeste," he said, reaching for the butter. "By the way, Dad did. I tell you about the guy I met at the conference last week. That's how it always went." When I funded the deposit for Mason's second warehouse after his investor backed out, he forgot to mention it in his thank you speech. When I paid the final balance on Mom's knee surgery after the insurance gap, she told people her coverage finally kicked in. I didn't correct them. I told myself I didn't need credit, that what mattered was helping, being useful, staying dependable. But somewhere along the way, being dependable became being disposable. They didn't forget my name, they just stopped using it. Even when I was there, I wasn't really there. And now that I had something they wanted, they didn't even pretend Jess's email wasn't about space. It was a reminder you're not part of this. Not in the way that matters, but that was fine because I wasn't planning to stay in the background much longer. I never set out to build anything big. It started with a quiet exit, leaving a company I'd helped grow for 7 years after they passed me over for a promotion. I trained the recipient to handle. I didn't shout or threaten to quit. I just packed up my office one Friday afternoon and told no one. The next Monday, I sat at my kitchen table. With a second-hand laptop, a fresh legal pad, and a cheap cup of coffee, I gave myself a deadline. 90 days to find a problem worth solving. By day, I freelanced supply chain modeling. Mostly, I worked odd hours, took on clients no one wanted. By night, I researched the gaps between mid-sized distributors and emerging regional carriers. What I found wasn't flashy, but it was consistent. Eventually, I formed a company, Small Quiet Lean. I didn't name it after myself. I registered it in Delaware under a generic holding name. North Arrow Systems, no LinkedIn post, no family announcement. At first, it was just me and a 24-year-old operations genius named Malik, who I met through a Slack channel. Then came Julia, who handled contracts like a surgeon. Then Lena and I had been friends in college. We used to sit on the fire escape outside our dorm and talk about the kind of women we'd become. She was bold, irreverent, magnetic. I was the one who double-checked the train schedule, Lena had once said. If you ever need me to walk into a room and make everyone underestimate me, I'm your girl. I remembered that line when we were preparing our first major pitch. I wasn't trying to hide who I was, but I also knew after years of watching how people dismissed me that sometimes silence is the strongest leverage. Let them think the girl who never interrupted anyone wasn't capable of owning the room. Let them forget I was there until it was too late. That's how we built it. In just over a year, we'd acquired 3 smaller logistics firms, quietly, no fanfare. Our network ran leaner, faster, smarter. We turned down VC funding twice. I wanted control, not congratulations. So when Lena came to me with a file marked Prospective Strategic Partnership Eastbound Freight into Solutions, I almost laughed because Eastbound was my brother Mason's company, and the firm they wanted to partner with the company they believed would solve their distribution. Bottleneck was us. They had no idea I flipped through their pitch deck. It was all there, glowing projections, warehouse expansion timelines, expected reach into secondary markets. They'd clearly been working on this deal for months, and they didn't know the final decision rested with me. They thought I was still freelancing, still working from home. Still Celeste, the sister who never had much going on. That was the part that stung, how easy it had been for them to believe I'd stayed small, that I wouldn't build anything worth noticing. But I had. And now, every update, every email, every pre-contract draft flowed through Lena to my desk. There was one line Mason had written in the executive summary of his proposal that stayed with me. This partnership will allow both companies to scale quickly, provided the decision-makers remain aligned. It made me smile because I was the decision-maker, and I was about to give them the meeting they'd been begging for. They just wouldn't recognize it when it started. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 9 Huzri a.m. sharp. Lena texted me at 8:46. They're early. Nervous. The cousins pacing. I watched the feed from my office well, technically a converted second bedroom in my apartment. The camera was tucked discreetly into the corner of the boardroom, wide-angle clear audio. Just enough to see their faces, not enough for them to know they were being seen. Mason arrived in a navy blazer, the one he wears when he wants to feel in control. Jonah, our cousin, followed behind him, carrying a branded portfolio like he was auditioning for a role. A third man, someone from their marketing team, said something about projections and locking this in before the holidays. Lena welcomed them with a calm smile. She wore gray, always gray, soft-spoken, but never unsure. She let them settle, let them talk. Mason, true to form, launched into the pitch before anyone asked. We believe this partnership is the missing piece. Your network, our routes. With the right execution, we're looking at doubling Q2 revenue by March. Lena nodded, jotting notes. Then she asked gently, "And what makes you confident we're aligned? We've done our research," Mason said. "We've modeled logistics based on your existing hubs. Assuming you're authorized to sign by Echelon Holdings, of course." There was a beat of silence. Lena leaned back in her chair. "I represent Echelon, but I don't sign." Mason blinked. "You're not the founder." "No," she said, and this time her voice carried more weight. "She is. She built the network. She funds it. She signs every deal." The air in the room shifted. Jonah leaned forward. "Wait, we've been speaking with the wrong person." Lena reached into her folio and slid a document across the table. I'd seen it earlier that week, my name in black ink, crisp and unmistakable. Celeste Ward, founder and CEO. Mason stared at the page, his eyes scanning it too quickly, as if speed would undo the meaning. "Is this a joke?" he asked quietly. "No," Lena said. "She got your Christmas message, by the way, the one about space being tight. thought you'd want to know. No one spoke." Jonah rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly very still. Mason looked like he wanted to speak, but couldn't find the right tone. Lena smiled, professional as ever. "You're still welcome to present your offer, but just so you know, she's not looking for partners anymore. She's looking to acquire." It was the gentlest knife I'd ever seen turned. I sat back from the monitor, letting the silence linger. They weren't angry yet. That would come later. Right now, they were just realizing all this time they thought I was sitting alone at Christmas because I had nowhere better to be. What they didn't know was that I'd been building the table they were now begging to sit at. I sent the email that same afternoon. No subject line, no greeting. Just one sentence. December 25th, 9 a.m., my address. Bring nothing. I knew they wouldn't respond. I also knew they would show up. When people realize they've been left out of something they thought they controlled, they don't demand an apology. They look for a way back in. So I waited. Christmas morning arrived cold and gray. The street was quiet. The city slowed to a crawl. I brewed coffee, lit a single candle on the windowsill, and set the table. 4 plates, 4 cups, linen napkins folded sharp at the corners. There was no centerpiece. Just warm bread eggs and a silver carafe that hadn't been used in years. At exactly 9 a.m., a knock opened the door to find Mason, Jonah, and our father. No wives, no kids, no coats, unzipped. Just the 3 of them standing on the porch like students waiting outside the principal's office. I didn't say a word, just stepped aside. They entered slowly, their footsteps too loud on the hardwood. Mason looked around. "You've kept it nice." I didn't answer. They sat hesitantly, each man glancing at the other as if waiting for permission. I poured coffee for everyone, including myself. Then I sat across from them and folded my hands. The silence stretched. Finally, Jonah cleared his throat. "So, are we here about the deal?" I looked at him, then at Mason, then at my father. "You're here because you remembered I exist," I said calmly. "And because you realized I'm not as invisible as you believed." Mason leaned forward. "Celeste, we didn't mean to..." "Didn't mean to," what I interrupted. "Didn't mean to leave my name off the invitation list. Didn't mean to send a 5-line email instead of a phone call. Or didn't mean to underestimate me for the 15th year in a row." No one answered. I reached for a folder resting on the edge of the table and slid it forward. Inside was the finalized contract. Everything they'd hoped for. The deal. The opportunity. The thing they'd built their projections around. Mason looked at it, then at me. Are you giving us the contract?" I nodded slowly. "Yes." "But there's a condition." He tensed. "What kind of condition?" "From this point forward, I said you work under my structure, not beside it. You report to me. You follow the systems I've built. And if I ever hear you speak to someone the way you spoke to me last month or last year or every year before that..." I let the pause stretch until Jonah shifted in his seat. "I won't cancel your deal," I finished. "I'll cut your company." The silence that followed was colder than the air outside. They knew I meant it. Not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't need to. Mason sat back, his jaw tight. Then finally he said something I hadn't expected. "You really waited for this moment." I looked at him. Really looked. "No," I said quietly. I waited for the silence to mean something, and then I stood. I picked up the empty plates. I refilled the carafe. I moved through the room like I had for years, but now they saw it. They saw me, not the helper, not the girl in the background, not the sibling who didn't mind, just me. And for the first time in a very long time, they had no idea what to do with that. I never stepped foot in their office, not once I didn't need to. The new logo, North Arrow Holdings, was mounted on the front of the building by the end of January. The font was sharp, understated. My name wasn't anywhere on it, but everyone inside knew who it pointed back to. The weekly reports started arriving like clockwork, polished decks, revised projections, revised tone. Mason's signature appeared smaller on each file, like he was shrinking into the margins. He was no longer CEO. That title went to someone else, a woman named Clarice, their former regional manager years ago. Mason once called her too soft to lead. Turns out she wasn't. Now she sat in the corner office, the one he used to fill with trophies and meaningless framed quotes. The plaques came down. The ego left with them. My cousin Jonah tried calling me twice. I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded his number to our internal HR platform with a note. All communication goes through channels now. Keep it professional." He didn't try again. I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. Anger burns fast. What I felt was quieter than that, heavier, like ash after the fire's gone out. 3 weeks later, I walked past a coffee shop on my way to a meeting. Through the fogged glass, I saw them, Mason, Jonah, and my father. No smiles, no bluster. Just 3 men staring into half-empty mugs, saying nothing. I didn't go in. Some reckonings are loud. Mine wasn't mine came in quarterly reports, system audits and controlled ownership transitions. Clean, quiet, permanent. 30 days after the acquisition, the final paperwork was signed. Eastbound Freight and Solutions ceased to exist. The brand dissolved. Their email addresses were updated to @NorthArrowCom. Their legacy, once printed on business cards and splashed across banners at trade expos, now sat as a footnote in an internal document labeled Subsidiary Ward Group, Logistics Division. No announcement, no farewell post, just deletion. A week after that, I called an all-hands meeting. I didn't tell them I'd be attending. They packed into the conference room like it was any other quarterly update. Mason sat in the front row spine, straight. Clarice stood near the door. Lena, always 5 steps ahead, had arranged everything. The lights dimmed, a short video played, not of me, but of the company's history. The mistakes, the wasted potential, missed opportunities, masked as confidence. Then one sentence appeared on the screen. Sometimes the person you ignore is building the ground you're about to stand on. A ripple moved through the room. A few gasps. Someone whispered my name. And then I walked in. I didn't say much. I looked at the faces. Some guilty, some hollow, some just confused, and I said, "You gave up on me when I had nothing. Now I own everything you built. And everything you thought I couldn't." The final slide came up. Effective immediately. All former partners are now employees. Titles removed. Salaries adjusted. Welcome to the new order. No applause. Just silence. As I turned to leave, someone near the back asked almost gently, "Why didn't you just shut it down?" I paused at the doorway. Because shutting it down would have ended it. Owning it means they live with it. I stepped into the hallway, and just like that, I left not only the room, but the story they once told about me for good. Some people come back to be welcomed. I came back so they could never rewrite the truth. If this story sat with you, if it reminded you of the rooms you were kept out of, or the names you were told not to say, then maybe you know what it feels like to be quietly erased, and maybe now, like me, you're done staying quiet. Subscribe if you've ever rebuilt yourself in silence. Share this if you know someone who thinks being quiet means being small. And if you've ever been cut out just for being the one who saw things clearly, you're not alone. I never asked to be loved again. I only made sure they'd never forget I was there.